For more than 1,000 years, one city stood between worlds, Constantinople. The capital of the Byzantine Empire, the guardian of the Bosporus, the city emperors called the New Rome. Its walls had resisted armies, sieges, rebellions, crusaders, and kings. For centuries, men had tried to take it, and for centuries, Constantinople had survived. But in the spring of 1453, a young Ottoman Sultan arrived before its walls. He was only 21 years old. His name was Mehmed. To his enemies, he was reckless. To his rivals, dangerous. To his followers, chosen for conquest. And by the time he was finished, the world would know him by another name, Mehmed the Conqueror.
Mehmed II was born in Edirne on March 30th, 1432. At the time, Edirne was one of the great centers of Ottoman power. Constantinople still stood, but the Ottoman state was no longer a small frontier principality. It was becoming an empire. Mehmed was the son of Sultan Murad II, a ruler who had spent much of his reign fighting in the Balkans and defending Ottoman power against crusading armies. As an Ottoman prince, Mehmed was not raised simply to live in luxury. He was expected to learn command. He was sent to Manisa, a provincial center where Ottoman princes were trained for government. There, he studied under senior tutors, including Molla Gurani, one of the most important figures connected to his education.
Later stories would portray Mehmed as unusually intelligent, intense, and ambitious. Some accounts claim he knew several languages, read widely, and admired figures like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. But even if some of those claims are difficult to prove, one thing is clear. Mehmed grew up with a vision of rulership that went far beyond survival. He was not being prepared merely to inherit a throne. He was being prepared to command an empire.
In 1444, when Mehmed was still a teenager, his father, Murad II, made a shocking decision. He abdicated. The throne passed to Mehmed. For a young prince, this should have been the beginning of glory, but instead, it exposed just how fragile Ottoman politics could be. Inside the Ottoman court, powerful men competed for influence. Some wanted aggressive expansion. Others, including the powerful Grand Vizier Chandarli Halil, were more cautious. Outside the empire, Christian powers saw opportunity. If the Ottomans were ruled by an inexperienced boy, perhaps now was the time to strike.
That same year, a crusading army advanced against the Ottomans. Murad II was forced to return from retirement, and at the Battle of Varna in November 1444, he defeated the Crusaders. Mehmed remained Sultan for a short time afterward, but his authority was weak. In 1446, the Janissaries revolted, and the political pressure became impossible. Murad returned to power. Mehmed was sent back to Manisa. It was a humiliation, but it was also a lesson. The teenage sultan had learned that ruling was not only about birthright. It was about controlling soldiers, managing factions, crushing rivals, and never allowing powerful men to think they could command the throne. Years later, when Mehmed returned to power, he would remember this.
In 1451, Murad II died. Mehmed returned to the throne. But this time, he was not the uncertain boy of 1444. He was 19 years old, hardened by failure, and determined to rule in his own name. Almost immediately, he moved to assert his authority. The Janissaries demanded the traditional accession payment. Mehmed paid them, but he also punished their insolence. He understood that the army was essential, but it could not be allowed to dominate him. Then
he turned toward the goal that would define his life: Constantinople. The city had been surrounded by Ottoman territory for decades. It was weakened, depopulated, and politically isolated. But symbolically, it was enormous. As long as Constantinople remained outside Ottoman control, the empire had a hole at its center. It was a Christian imperial capital sitting between Ottoman Europe and Ottoman Asia. To Mehmed, that was unacceptable. If he could take Constantinople, he would not simply capture a city. He would inherit Rome.
Mehmed did not rush blindly toward the walls. He prepared. In 1452, he ordered the construction of Rumeli Hisari, a massive fortress on the European side of the Bosporus. Its position was strategic. From there, Ottoman guns could control shipping moving between the Black Sea and Constantinople. The message was clear: no help would reach the city from the north. At the same time, Mehmed expanded his fleet. He negotiated carefully with Venice and Hungary, trying to keep potential enemies neutral while he focused on Constantinople. And then there were the cannons. Ottoman engineers and foreign specialists cast enormous bombards capable of smashing stone walls that had stood for centuries. Popular history often makes these cannons the entire story.
But they were only one part of Mehmed's plan. He would use artillery. He would use ships. He would use mining. He would use diplomacy. He would use terror, pressure, patience, and constant adaptation. The siege of Constantinople was not won by one weapon. It was won by a system, and Mehmed was the mind driving it. On April 6, 1453, the siege began. Constantinople was defended by Emperor Constantine XI and a small force of Byzantines, Genoese, Venetians, and other allies. They were badly outnumbered. But they had one great advantage: the Theodosian walls. These walls were among the most formidable defensive systems in the medieval world. Layered, massive, and battle-tested, they had saved Constantinople again and again. Mehmed's army surrounded the land walls. His fleet pressured the sea approaches. His cannons began pounding the defenses. Day after day, stones shattered, towers cracked, dust filled the air. The defenders repaired breaches at night, only to watch them smashed again by morning. Inside the city, fear grew. Outside the walls, Mehmed studied every weakness. One of the key targets was the area near the Gate of St. Romanus, considered one of the more vulnerable points in the defense. The Ottomans concentrated fire there, but still Constantinople held. The walls were damaged, but not destroyed. The defenders were exhausted, but not broken. So Mehmed changed the battlefield.
One of Constantinople's strongest defenses was the Golden Horn, the protected harbor north of the city. A great chain blocked enemy ships from entering. As long as that chain held, the defenders could protect the harbor side of the city. Mehmed tried direct naval attacks, but they failed, so he chose a more daring solution. He had ships dragged over land. Using greased logs and manpower, Ottoman vessels were hauled across land and lowered into the Golden Horn behind the chain. To the defenders, it must have seemed impossible. Ships that could not break through the harbor defenses had simply gone around them. The move did not instantly win the siege, but it changed everything. Now, Constantinople had to defend more walls with fewer men. The psychological pressure increased. The Ottomans built floating bridges. They shifted artillery. They forced the defenders to stretch themselves thinner and thinner. This was Mehmed's real genius. When one method failed, he did not stop. He adapted. He pushed from another angle. He turned the city's strength
into a trap.
By late May, the siege had lasted nearly 8 weeks. The walls were battered, the defenders were exhausted, and Mehmed knew the moment had come. On May 29, 1453, before dawn, the final assault began. The Ottomans attacked in waves. First came irregular troops meant to wear down the defenders. Then came more disciplined forces. Finally, the elite janissaries moved forward. At the walls, the fighting was desperate. The defenders had held for weeks, but they could not hold forever. Somewhere amid the chaos, the defense began to collapse. Emperor Constantine XI disappeared in the fighting, traditionally believed to have died near the walls. Ottoman troops poured into the city. After more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had fallen. The Byzantine Empire was over. And Mehmed, the young sultan who had once been dismissed as inexperienced, rode into the city as a conqueror.
The fall of Constantinople was violent and traumatic. There was looting, there were captives, there was death. Contemporary sources disagree on the exact numbers, and many figures are difficult to trust. But the scale of the catastrophe for the city's inhabitants was enormous. Yet Mehmed did not want Constantinople to remain a ruin. He wanted it as a capital. He entered Hagia Sophia and converted it into a mosque, a symbol that the city had passed into Ottoman hands. But he also began rebuilding. He encouraged and forced resettlement. Greeks, Turks, Jews, Armenians, merchants, craftsmen, administrators, and religious leaders were brought into the city. He restored the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate. He recognized Jewish and Armenian communal leadership. This was not tolerance in the modern sense. It was imperial strategy. Mehmed understood that a city could not function by conquest alone. It needed people. It needed trade. It needed religion organized under authority. It needed markets, shops, neighborhoods, and institutions. Constantinople was no longer the capital of Byzantium. It was becoming Ottoman Istanbul.
For many rulers, conquering Constantinople would have been enough. For Mehmed, it was only the beginning. After 1453, he continued expanding. He moved through southeastern Europe, annexing Serbia and the Morea. He absorbed Trebizond, one of the last Byzantine successor states, in 1461. He extended Ottoman influence around the Black Sea. He occupied Bosnia. He campaigned in Wallachia against Vlad III, later remembered as Vlad the Impaler. He fought Venice in a long and difficult war from 1463 to 1479. He subdued Karaman in Anatolia, and in 1473 he defeated Uzun Hasan of the Akkoyunlu at Otlukbeli, strengthening Ottoman dominance in the east. By the end of his reign, the Ottomans were no longer simply one regional power among many. They were a major imperial force, stretching across Europe and Asia. Mehmed even projected power into Italy, seizing Otranto in 1480. His death in 1481 interrupted whatever larger Mediterranean plans he may have had, but the message was clear. Mehmed's ambitions did not stop at Constantinople. He imagined empire on a world scale.
Mehmed was not only a conqueror, he was also a builder of institutions. His reign strengthened the power of the central Ottoman state. Older Turkish noble families and frontier aristocrats lost influence. In their place rose a service elite connected to the Sultan's household, including officials shaped by the Devshirme system. This mattered because it made the empire more directly dependent on the ruler. Mehmed did not want powerful families acting as equals to the throne. He wanted servants of the state who owed their careers to him. He also became associated with major developments in Ottoman law.
The Kanunname, or law code, helped organize administrative, financial, and dynastic practices under sultanic authority. This did not replace Islamic law, but it supplemented it. It gave the Ottoman state a more explicit legal framework for governing a rapidly expanding empire. Some later traditions connect Mehmed's legal code with the controversial practice of dynastic fratricide, the killing of rival princes to prevent civil war. Whether viewed as brutal necessity or ruthless centralization, it reveals the world Mehmed inhabited, a world where succession disputes could destroy states, and a ruler who believed order was worth almost any price.
Mehmed also understood the power of culture. He commissioned palaces and mosques. He supported scholars, artists, architects, and religious institutions. He helped transform Istanbul into a capital worthy of empire. His court drew from many traditions: Turkic, Persian, Islamic, Byzantine, and even Italian Renaissance influences. One of the most famous images of him was painted by Gentile Bellini, a Venetian artist. That portrait is revealing. Mehmed was not rejecting the wider world, he was absorbing it. He could present himself as a Muslim sultan, a conqueror of Constantinople, a ruler in the tradition of Persian kingship, and even an heir to Rome. That is why one of his most important titles was Kaiser-i-Rum, Caesar of Rome. To Mehmed, conquering Constantinople did not mean he had destroyed Rome. It meant he had inherited it. But Mehmed's empire came at a cost. War was expensive. Fortresses, armies, fleets, cannons, campaigns, and rebuilding projects demanded enormous resources. To finance his ambitions, Mehmed used coin debasements, monopolies, confiscations, and heavy fiscal measures. These policies strengthened the state, but they also created resentment. Some groups benefited from the new imperial order. Others suffered under its demands. By the time Mehmed died in 1481, he left his son Bayezid II a much larger empire, but also a tense one. His achievements were enormous. So were the pressures he created.
Mehmed II remains one of the most consequential rulers in world history. To Ottoman tradition, he was the conqueror who fulfilled a destiny. To Byzantine memory, he was the destroyer of an ancient Christian empire. To modern historians, he is something more complicated. He was not simply a holy warrior. He was not simply a Renaissance prince. He was a strategist, a centralizer, a patron, a lawgiver, and a ruthless imperial ruler. He broke Constantinople's walls, but his greater achievement was what came after. He turned conquest into government. He turned a captured city into a capital. He turned the Ottoman state into an empire with Roman, Islamic, Balkan, Anatolian, and Mediterranean ambitions. In 1453, the world did not simply watch a city fall. It watched a new imperial order rise. And at the center of that transformation stood a young sultan who refused to be remembered as the boy once pushed from the throne. He would be remembered as Mehmed II, the Conqueror.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment. Thanks for watching.